Good morning to the Honorable Ministers of the Council, members of the media, online viewers, radio listeners via St. Martin Gov Radio 107.9 FM and respective radio stations island-wide. I'm Rolika Roach and welcome to the Live Council of Ministers press briefing for today, Wednesday, October 16th, 2019. At this time, I invite the Minister of Public Housing, Spatial Planning, Environment and Infrastructure, as well as the Acting Minister of Public Health, Social Development and Labor, the Honorable Christopher Waver.
Thank you, Ms. Roach. Good morning to the Honorable Prime Minister, the media, and good morning to St. Martin. I have a few announcements to make. First, I'd like to start with a cleanup and recycling campaign. Upcoming Thursday, October 17th, I will have the pleasure to host a number of NGOs, stakeholders, foundations, associations, and various groups that are involved in environmental awareness, cleanup initiatives, and recycling. This is very important meeting. In this very important meeting, we'll focus on the upcoming cleanup and recycling campaign of the Ministry of Romi. We have issued a general invitation to all of these groups and stakeholders because we believe it is essential that they are involved and share ideas to ensure that the campaign will be a successful one. The meeting will be held in Conference Room 1 on the first floor of the Government Administration Building. It will be held from 6 p.m. until 7 p.m. this Thursday, October 17. Any environmental involved group willing to attend this meeting should email vromisxm@gmail.com. So that's vromisxm@gmail.com to confirm their attendance. Next, we are also preparing a slogan competition. So in this same context, the cleanup and recycling campaign will also be in need of a slogan. We can all remember the Take Pride, Don't Throw It Outside of a few years ago. To this day, we remember that campaign largely due to its slogan. A slogan makes the campaign memorable, so a call has been put out to the general public to help us find a slogan for the campaign. Persons of all ages can submit their slogan ideas between October 15th and October 28th. You may do so via the same email address, romisxm@gmail.com, or by sending a WhatsApp message to 1-721-520-7668. Lastly, finally, I am sure you might have read already, and on Tuesday, I had to dispel a false narrative that was being painted in the public, spreading wrong information about a civil servant under the Ministry of Romi being either fired, dismissed, or demoted. All lies. It was all misinformation and only for political spinning in this political climate that we are in. Something that happens on a regular basis within the government organization. Confidential between government and civil servant. All of a sudden became a public debate because of a political taint that was placed upon it. This is the only reason I thought it necessary to clarify the situation before it continued to live a life of its own. I will not discuss confidential issues between government and individual civil servants in the public domain, and I hope the explanation provided on Tuesday and once again in today's local paper about the issue that was circulating was clear to the public. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Waver, for your opening remarks. At this time, I invite the Prime Minister and Minister of Education, Culture, Youth and Sport, the Honorable Wycliffe Smith, to address you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Roach, and greetings to all gathered here this morning, colleague ministers, the Department of Communications, members of the press, as well as those who are listening or viewing via radio, television, or social media. Good morning, Sualiga. As Sualigans, last week we lost a sister, a mother, a compatriot, and a dear friend in the passing of Daniela Jeffrey. She loved this island passionately and shared her love for it wherever she went. She has recounted our history many times for generations to embrace. Now, her name will be immortalized in our stories as one of our stalwarts. Another stalwart who departed is Addie Richardson, entertainer, singer, known to us as the man with the golden voice. On behalf of the government of St. Martin, I extend deepest condolences to the family and friends of Daniela Jeffrey, Addie Richardson, and also to the family of well-known taxi driver Joyce Fleming. The St. Martin stalwarts may be gone, but they will certainly live on in our memories and in the history of our beloved St. Martin. May their souls rest in peace. On Monday, October 14th, the government of St. Martin and the St. Martin National Commission for UNESCO presented a Constitution Day service and Intangible Cultural Heritage Inventory launch, and an Intangible Cultural Heritage Vendors Market and Public Display at the St. Simon and Jude Anglican Church in Phillipsburg. Thank you to the Secretary General for the UNESCO St. Martin Mission, Ms. Marcelia Henry, and the Department of Culture, headed by Ms. Clara Reyes, for their efforts in showcasing our rich heritage and culture. It was good to see the many persons sharing their ware and the members of the community who came out to participate and to celebrate. Remember, our people are strong because we have a rich heritage. Our Constitution is for the safeguarding of our people, and we, the people, must protect and uphold it. I've taken note of the recent support given to the motion presented in the second chamber of the Dutch Parliament to start a dialogue with the government of St. Martin to see if the Netherlands should take over management of law enforcement on our island. In light of the caretaker status of the current government, it is not likely that this proposed dialogue will be met with the anticipated interim government. Personally, though, I encourage the leaders of St. Martin to think and act in accordance with and in the interest of St. Martin and her people. We are a young nation, and as part of our growth and development, we are willing to accept assistance from more experienced partners and countries in several areas, including law enforcement. However, I'm firmly against any action that may infringe on the rights of the St. Martin people. No consideration should be given to measures that would remove the authority and management of our local services from the hands of St. Martiners to be placed under the control of others. Partners within the kingdom who are truly seeking the interest of St. Martin and her people will offer their support without seeking control. Sunday, October 13th, was observed as the International Day for Disaster Reduction. I wish to remind all citizens, residents, and visitors that the hurricane season continues until November 30th. We must always continue to be vigilant and prepared. As Prime Minister, this week I will be meeting with the EOC to ensure that all is in place in the event of any disaster or national emergency. And I encourage all to be prepared. I also ask that we continue to pray that collectively we be spared from any such undesirable events. In a recent media publication, the President of Parliament, MP William Marlin, queried whether the Council of Ministers voted on former Prime Minister Leona Marlin representing the island as a private citizen, unquote, at a function being held at the World Bank. I immediately responded via press release as several media houses reached out for clarification. Last evening, I received the MP's official request for answers on this subject via the Secretariat of Parliament. I will be sending the MP a direct response to his questions. However, I would like to quickly set the record clear for the general public so that information is factual and not misconstrued in any manner or, as the MP stated, assumed in any fashion as well. The facts are, former Prime Minister Leona Marlin was invited to 2 conferences in Dominica in mid-October, one on disaster management and the other on addressing transparency standards in the Caribbean. The other conference that the former MP was invited to was the Nexus Europe Summit in the Netherlands on November 16th. Both the October conferences as well as the November summit would be covered by the organizations that invited the former PM, and a part would have been covered by the former PM herself. This meant that St. Martin in no way, directly or indirectly, would have paid for this trip. At the time, we were aware of the caretaker status of the Council of Ministers and saw her attending the various events as no issue in terms of her status as caretaker Prime Minister. So on October 8th, the Council voted against then PM Romeo Marlin's request for her resignation to be effected, and a decision was taken to allow her to attend the October and the November conferences. It should be understood that any active minister must have the approval of the Council of Ministers for travel and engagements that reflect on the role of the government. However, 2 days later, on October 10th, 2019, the Prime Minister Romeo Marlin made another request for her release from the duties as Prime Minister and Minister of General Affairs. And given her reasons, the decision was taken by the Council of Ministers to accept the resignations of both then Prime Minister Marlin Romeo and then Minister of Justice De Wever. This decision was based on their request to leave immediately to prevent further political turmoil. As a result of their release from ministerial duties, the approval granted by the Council of Ministers to Mrs. Romeo Marlin will be retracted. This was noted last week. However, due to the travel of Minister Geerlings, we will be voting in the next Council of Ministers to retract this decision. The retraction is based on the fact that now that Mrs. Romeo Marlin is no longer Prime Minister, she has returned to her duties as a civil servant and not just as, quote unquote, a private citizen, as stated by MP Marlin. With her returning to this status, the procedure for requests to travel for the conference is now different. As a civil servant, she is now required to request days not from the Council of Ministers, but rather from the Secretary General of the Ministry of General Affairs. I have been in touch with Mrs. Romeo Marlin concerning this matter. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Mrs. Romeo Marlin, former Prime Minister, for her dedicated service to this country as Prime Minister, and wish her the very best as she moves on. In the same breath, let me also say thank you to former Minister Mr. Van Hugh Cornelius de Wever for his faithful service as Minister of Justice to the country of St. Martin. I also extend best wishes to you as you move on. Thank you for watching and for listening, and will be available for any questions. Have a pleasant day.
Thank you, Prime Minister Smith, for your opening remarks. The Minister of the Minister of Tourism, Economic Affairs, Transport, and Telecommunications, the Honorable Stuart Johnson, is present. However, will not be making any opening statements, but is available for any questions the media may have. We now move on to the question and answer session. Dimitri Whitfield of the Daily Herald, you have the floor.
Hi, good morning to St. Martin, good morning to the Council of Ministers and everyone listening at home. My question is to the Minister of Romi, who now is functioning as the acting head of Domain Affairs. What stage is the process in to formally hire someone for this position, and how long is this process expected to take?
Thank you for your question. The acting of Domain Affairs right now is done by Mr. Louis Brown. It is the Secretary General of the department. The recruitment process will be started for the to relocate a person to fill the position as head of Domain Affairs. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Waver. Lyndon Brown of BCN TV, you have the floor.
Good morning to the people of St. Martin and to our ministers today. Question to the Honorable Prime Minister, Minister Smith. Minister Smith, recently I asked a question about the measure Mr. Knops from the Dutch cabinet mentioned about if St. Martin do not take its acts in place, we will take some measure. I heard the sentiment of your speech just now, Minister Smith. Is something in the making? Can you make it clear to the people if something is underway?
Mr. Brown, thank you very much. Mr. Brown, I am not aware of those statements made by State Secretary Knops that interventions will take place. I'm not aware. Measures will take place. I'm not aware of those statements. Certainly, I'm not aware of anything in writing pertaining to that. There's nothing in the making as with reference to the motion that was on the floor of the second chamber last night, where a motion was passed whereby it was indicated the Kingdom government may want to look into and study the possibilities of helping out taking over the management. I think, according to the motion, as I saw it, it means that there will be discussions with St. Martin on how that will go. So there's no measure being handed down in terms of, the Dutch intervening and taking over. That's not the case.
Thank you, Prime Minister Smith. Nakisha Boseman of the Daily Herald, you have the floor.
Hi, good morning, ministers. Good morning, St. Martin. My question is for Minister Smith. It's in regards to the Prince William Alexander School. It appears that the construction has stopped. Can you answer if this is true? Why and when will it resume?
As far as I know, the construction is ongoing. Maybe they've slowed down, but it has not stopped as far as my information goes.
Thank you, Prime Minister Smith. We now move on to the second round of questions. Dimitri, you have the floor.
Okay, my second question is to Minister Smith. An article was published in the Curacao media about that indicated that Finance Minister Geerlings and the President of the Central Bank of St. Martin and Curacao are in Miami for talks. Can you indicate who the minister is meeting with and what are these talks about? Is it with Mr. Ansari and regarding the ENIA issue?
The Minister of Finance is in the U.S. attending IMF annual meetings, and also his colleague, I believe, is also with him. So these are annual meetings that are taking place, and as far as I am aware, there are no discussions with other entities. I know that they went together and they'll be looking at central bank matters, but as far as I know, not with the Honorable Hushang Ansari.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Lyndon, you have the floor.
Question 2. Minister Johnson. Minister Johnson, there was discussion about a harbor being soon to run by an offshore company for the betterment. How far this process is?
Thank you, Mr. Brown, for your question. And of course, port management of our port is busy negotiating and finalizing the selection process to start an RFP. An RFP, of course, is a request for proposal, financing proposals through several third parties. You know, anyone outside of government is a third party. So any group of financiers, any group of consortium of financiers would be having the ability to finance, look at capital financing necessary for the harbor. If we look at the indications of where the harbor is financially, if we look at our need to evolve as a cruise destination overall to enhance that experience, this is now more than ever the reason to look at either having cruise lines or a cruise line or two come together to finance what is the improvements needed at the harbor, whether it's another third party. So I know the campaign trail in some facets have already warmed up. I've seen some public meetings scattered here and there already starting to say that global ports is going to be the new tagline. Minister Johnson has absolutely no favorite. My only favorite is the people of St. Martin and this great country. And once they are number one, that is the only proposal that I'm in favor of. So indeed, no scare tactics, no rush to get on the campaign trail for a couple votes. Indeed, the harbor is not for sale. What is for sale, of course, is that we realize that St. Martin has to learn that we have to evolve with our tourism product. Our neighboring islands are simply not waiting. If you look at St. Kitts, Antigua, and around the region, no one is waiting for St. Martin. Our storyline of we're still recovering from Irma is long gone. It's time to get our act together, clean up this island, and get this country back on track stronger than ever. And the port forms part of that, and of course the airport also, because improvements at the port in terms of home porting and otherwise is dependent of a fully operational, restored airport with USP clearance.
Thank you, Minister Johnson. Nikisha, you have the floor.
Who will represent St. Martin at the conference in New York?
At which conference? I mentioned two. But in any case, St. Martin will not be represented at those conferences. Those conferences were, at those conferences, the former Prime Minister was invited on her own personal title. And so if she attends, it will be for her own account. And no one from St. Martin will be represented at those conferences.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We now move on to the third round of questions. Dimitri, you have the floor.
My third question is for Minister Johnson. A couple of weeks ago, I asked you about what is the exact amount of the harbor's debt and who it's owed to. As of yet, I have no response from you or the harbor regarding this issue. So can you clarify today?
Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. Indeed, the port management, as well as the FCCA president and my person as minister in charge of TIAT, held a press conference, which was at the Sonesta Resort. As a reminder for that, I also asked the port to also provide you that information. I will also remind them again to provide that. I know some of the senior top members of the management was off island on vacation at that time, so I will make sure and provide that information to you through port management as requested.
Thank you, Minister Johnson. Lyndon, you have the floor.
Question to Minister Weaver. Minister, presently now, people are furious about the ongoing accident at the Colby Hill roundabout. What do you have on table? Do you have any plan to make it better? Because the sentiment is the people looking for somebody to blame. So, Minister, speak to the people of St. Martin.
Thank you for your question. We as myself as Minister of Roaming have taken note of it, and I guess we will look into every accident is caused by something else. So we have to really look into it to see if roaming actually has a role to play, or if government has a role to play. I think that will be discussed. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Waver. Nikisha, you have the floor.
My third question is to Minister Smith again. What is government's position on the call by the business community for the receiver to revisit its decision to stop accepting checks as a form of payment, as this will further hamper businesses? Is this something that government is willing to reconsider instead of the blanket measure?
Certainly, this is something that we will be looking into, as the Minister of Finance is currently off island. Will be back most likely tomorrow, God's willing. And this is something that we will be discussing with him, and he will be reaching out to the various stakeholders. And I'm sure that by next week, he would be able to give a better response to your question.
Thank you, Prime Minister Smith. We now move on to the final round of questions. Dimitri, you have the floor.
Okay, so my final question is to Minister Waver. There was some rain the last couple of days. Is there any, and the roads have been not really damaged, but rocks and dirt and stuff in the road. Is there any plan to have road works out in the next couple of days to address this issue?
Thank you for your question. Yes, definitely. Every time there's a storm, we look at the situation, and then together with the Department of Infrastructure Management, we will see which roads need to clear up and have those cleared as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Waver. Lyndon, you have the floor.
Question to the Prime Minister of General Affairs. Minister, for the past days and week, there was some merciless shooting. Minister is battering. What the ministers have in plan? Because it seemed like after Hurricane Irma, people are still suffering. People are still suffering mentally, and it's building up in anger, and we see a lot of merciless behavior, robbery, shooting. Say something, Minister. Give hope to the people of St. Martin.
Well, any type of shooting, Mr. Brown, or any type of crime, it's something that would not, be acceptable in our community at all. We are all together people living in this island, and we have to look and care for one another and encourage one another. I believe that, everybody looks to government for all the solutions, but we need to also look at one another and be our brother's keeper as well. So I would like to extend, condolences to the family members of those who have been touched by these crimes, and wish them well. And certainly government will be looking at what measures can be taken to try to mitigate these types of crimes and situations. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister Smith. Minister Johnson.
Permit me to just add on a few remarks in regards to the sensitivity of when we, as a community, put center stage these types of acts, and we sensationalize everything in that regard. We are indeed a tourism destination. I know social media sometimes goes like wildfire, voice notes nowadays goes like wildfire, but at the end of the day, what is the impression, what is the image we are selling for our destination? For every negative media report, it takes 10, 20 times that amount of effort to recapture that positive attention. What I hope to see from our very professional press corps on St. Martin is to continue to ensure that positive news continues to be the headlines of the day, continues to ensure that indeed ministers are accountable, yes, our parliamentarians are accountable, every facet of this country is accountable, but let us not forget how sensitive we are still as a country in terms of the rebounding as a nation from the 2 hurricanes that we experienced, and more so how sensitive we are in recapturing our tourism market. That is very important for us as a nation, what we sell both in our media, printed, as well as our online media, as well as our image we sell through social media. Through indeed, as the Honorable Prime Minister indicated, it is indeed unfortunate that these things take place, isolated cases, but indeed to sensationalize and make it seem as if there is mass shootings everywhere and it's total chaos in St. Martin. I surely cannot subscribe to that, but I do hope that the people of St. Martin remain mindful and indeed seek the necessary counsel if need be through whatever experience they might be having. And indeed, peace and love is always the best approach, and tolerance.
Thank you, Minister Johnson. Nikita, you have the final question.
My question is for Minister Smith. What are the primary things that you have started that you would like to see any new Minister of Education, Culture, Youth and Sport to continue on?
Thank you for your question. There are a couple of things. Let me start by saying the financial aspect of education. I've been very concerned about that. I want to make sure that we're getting the education worth that we're paying for. So, been discussing with the Minister of General Affairs, my predecessor, also with persons from the NRPB and the World Bank to do a public review of finances, and particularly honing in on education to see where our money's going, how it's spent. In addition to that, we have authorized the SOAB to conduct an audit of all school boards, and they have begun, they've started. I just had a meeting with the SOAB where I was informed that they've had meetings with the school boards to introduce what they're doing. Often when we think of audit, everybody gets scared, but it's an assessment and evaluation of how the subsidies that is granted to school boards are being used, being spent, being utilized, so that we can even help school boards if in the end the result indicates now that the subsidy is not enough. That is something that we would have to review within the ministry. One other aspect that we have begun, and that is trying to rebrand the St. Martin Vocational Technical School, and we have reviewed the curriculum. They have started this year to look at it and to try to reach all the students that attend that school. So those are some of the things, and of course there are several others. We've worked with all the departments and all the divisions, and looking at, for example, the law on higher education. That is something that has started and is in the process to be finalized within a couple of months to be able to send it to Parliament. So there are some things that we're working on. I want to thank you very much for your question.
Thank you, Prime Minister Smith. Honorable Ministers of the Council, members of the media, online viewers and radio listeners, this brings us to the end of the live Council of Ministers press briefing for today, Wednesday, October 16th, 2019. For rebroadcast, tune in at 7 p.m. on St. Martin Cable TV and via St. Martin Gov Radio 107.9 FM. For video on demand, log on to the official government's website at stmartingov.org. On behalf of the Department of Communication, I'm Rolika Roach, and wishing you a pleasant day further.